I'm excited to be here tonight. I get to share some great information to help you prepare for a multi-day river rafting, whitewater river rafting experience on a western river. And we are first going to talk a little bit about Leave No Trace as it pertains specifically to western river corridors. This is very generic information that would apply to any river in the West, but I will from time to time drop specific tidbits about a specific river that I'm preparing you to go down, the Lower Salmon River in northern Idaho. So we are going to dive into the 7 principles of Leave No Trace, and we are going to delve into the specifics of the river aspects of those principles and how they differ somewhat from the more generic principles. So the first principle of Leave No Trace is plan and prepare. So you are starting that process tonight with me, hearing and learning about Leave No Trace. Now, the very first aspect of running a river in the West is that almost all of them, virtually the vast majority of them, absolutely require prior planning because most of them require specialized processes, lottery permits to even win the right to go down it. The rivers are so popular, have been for decades, that the decision was made by all of the governing agencies that we would limit how many people get to go down a river so that at least the people who win the permit have a great experience, rather than letting it just be wide open to everybody who would want to go down the river. So unfortunately, what that means to you as a private river runner is if you have lots of dollars and money and you want to sign up with any commercial outfitter anywhere in the West to go down any river and you have the money, you can do it anytime you want, as many times as you want in a given season. But if you're a private individual and you want to run these rivers, almost all of them require complicated advanced preparation, application, and lottery permits to win. Now, the one unique exception to that rule is the Lower Salmon River in northern Idaho. And just because it's not part of the lottery system doesn't mean it's not a darn good river to run. So it's really awesome that at least there's one really good river that we can all have access to. The permit for the Lower Salmon River, you actually just go to the trailhead that put in, we call it, at where the river starts, where your trip will begin, fill out a self-issuing permit, drop it in the box, and go float the river. There's no fees. There's no advanced real preparation in terms of other than that. The advanced preparation is learning the stuff I'm going to tell you about so you don't impact the river negatively or the experience. Now, some other aspects about proper prior planning would be simply learning how to run a river so you don't have to call for a rescue or something or people get harmed, because anytime a rescue gets involved, human life trumps everything. So rules about caring for the outdoors kind of go out the window when you have to start bringing in rescue teams and helicopters and all sorts of other things. This is definitely about an 80-mile wild, remote place you're traveling to. So you definitely want to have the skill sets. I'm confident that I can prepare you adequately with prior training trips on western Washington rivers. Other aspects of planning and prepare simply are food. A lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight and a lot of what a river rafting trip is centered around is food. I hope you like to eat. I hope you like to plan really good meals. I hope you like to prepare them, because one of the unique aspects of river running is we actually, as private river runners, kind of follow the model of outfitters. Outfitters learned early on, we're talking like in the 40s and 50s, they started running these rivers and taking commercial clients down them. And of course, to them, that meant dude ranch style, food, caring for people's needs and having really good food. So that whole style of river running evolved. And then eventually private river runners started catching on and basically mirror what the outfitters are doing. So that's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be car camping. You're going to be living with real food out of coolers and out of boxes. And you can prepare the same kind of meals, virtually almost any meal that you could prepare in your kitchen at home, you could prepare on the side of the river. So plan on putting lots of energy into meal planning, good meals, well prepared, and eat well, because that's one of the core features of running a river, at least with this style and this approach to river running. Now, involved in that is how do we deal with it? How do we deal with the food and the waste and other things? So we're going to touch on that. That's all part of plan and prepare. So these are some of the ideas that are necessary. And if I was going to suggest to you anything to prepare yourselves better prior to the trip, it's do some weekend car camping trips. You know, learn how to cook. A lot of us that just backpack and use heat water and eat freeze-dried food, or even winter camping do the same thing. And we go to scout camp and we eat in what? A mess hall. So some of you may not have skills for cooking car camping style food. This is a great opportunity for you to plan some weekend car camping experiences and learn how to cook food, real food. Now, the second principle of Leave No Trace is travel and camp on durable surfaces. Do you think water is a durable surface? Do you think sand is a durable surface? Absolutely, they are durable surfaces. There is nothing you can do as a scout to harm the water as you travel down it. There is nothing you can do as a scout to harm sand. I guarantee it. You can't do anything harmful. And since these campsites, though they are primitive and wild and very much wilderness campsites, they are heavily impacted. There'll be probably over 10,000 people travel that river corridor in a fairly short period of time. And so the campsites have definitely seen some human use. But hopefully, when you go there and experience them, they will seem just as wild and primitive as if no one had ever been there before you or after you. And that's the goal of these guidelines or these ethical behaviors that we're asking you to learn and practice. So as far as travel and camp on durable surfaces, we got it made in the shade. You don't even have to worry about it. And then once you leave your campsite, if whatever you were sleeping sort of made a little impression, just sweep the sand over a little bit, make it look wild again, is virtually all you have to do to these campsites. So traveling and camping on durable surfaces is pretty easy to accomplish running a Western River corridor. The third principle of Leave No Trace, and this is the single most important one. And before I go any further, I'm going to have everybody going on this trip raise their right hand and promise to me that you will abide by the ethical principles of Western River Corridor Leave No Trace that I'm asking you and teaching you tonight. On your Scout's honor, you will promise that, okay? Great. So, waste management. That's the single biggest issue. We are all going down this narrow river corridor, camping on these sandy beaches, and so we literally have to, every single thing, from the smallest scrap of anything that we bring down this river, we have to pack that back out again. And so let's talk a little bit specifically first about water usage and water waste. Your source of drinking water will be the river. It's a relatively clean river. It's not dammed. There's not a lot, there's, to my knowledge, very little, if any, agricultural stuff upstream. It flows out of the central part of Idaho for hundreds of miles. It's relatively very clean water. With that said, you still need to filter it. You still need to treat it. And we'll talk about that specifically during the group session. But that's where you're getting your source of drinking water. And it's also your number one source of disposing of two types of liquid waste. So the first one would be any kind of kitchen waste. So if you open a can of green beans, the liquid in that can of green beans has got to go somewhere, right? It's going into a bucket, and it's ultimately being mixed into the river. It's not being poured out on the ground anywhere. If you, as you create kitchen liquid waste, that has to be collected and put into a bucket or something, and it has to be poured ultimately into the river after being strained. Minute straining. So you need to bring, as part of your kitchen equipment, the ability to strain all your wastewater to a minute level. So as you're getting rid of your kitchen wastewater, it's being poured through a strainer, collected in a bucket. I will provide buckets. And then that is then in turn poured into the river, and the food scraps or other waste products are going with you in your trash and going out to civilization to be disposed of in a landfill. So all liquid waste of any kind. That includes dishwashing water. So the best way is before the plate or bowl or glass ever even gets into the soapy dishwater, and then into the hot rinse, and then into the cold chlorine rinse, and then aired out to dry, before it ever even went through that 3-bucket process, it had to be scraped religiously. So scrape all that food and just get all that stuff off in the initial scraping into some sort of bucket that's going to go with you with your waste when I deal with solid waste. So all liquid waste is going in the river in the main part of the current. So where you typically pull into a campsite, it's going to be an eddy or fairly calm water where you're going to pull the boats up on. You're going to go to the head of the eddy or to the tail of the eddy where there's really is current moving. And you're going to pour this waste bucket of water into the main river where it's moving. You're not pouring it into calm water in an eddy in front of a campsite. Now there's a second form of liquid waste that has to go in the river too, and this is a big divergence from your experience in the Cascades. All urine goes into the river. Every bit of urine goes into the river. You pee in the river. You walk out in the river and you pee. And of course, you can go a little bit upstream of camp or downstream of camp. If it's a mixed gender group, I would suggest that you determine at each campsite, which place you're going to let the female genders go to squat and pee and the men go to squat and pee. Identify that so people aren't being, going to the wrong side of the eddy, wrong side of the campsite. You can also establish a bucket by the solid waste toilet system, which I'll tell you about, and people certainly could pee into that bucket. And so you could have multiple people peeing in the bucket if you choose, and then that bucket would then in turn be poured into the river. Now, this generic principle applies to any river over 500 CFS, which stands for cubic feet per second of flow. So 500 cubic feet of water per second moving down a river. That's a pretty small river, actually. When you're running the lower salmon, it's going to be flowing probably somewhere between 9 or 10,000 CSF and maybe 7,000 CSF. So you can see there's a considerable difference between 500 CFS and 7,000 or 10,000. So at the volume of water we're talking about, the agencies managing these rivers have determined that that has the least impact on the river corridor, is to mix liquid waste with the mainstream of the water. So wrap your head around it, but you're going to be peeing in the same river you're drinking out of. But if I were you, I wouldn't concern yourselves, because you've been doing that man has been doing that for thousands of years. Where do you think you get your drinking water for the city? Reservoirs. Do you think those reservoirs are pristine and there's no urine in those reservoirs? Then you are really marching up a different drum or something. Anyway, so wrap your head around it. You're going to pee in the river and you're going to put all your liquid waste in the river. Now, in terms of solid waste, obviously there's two types of that. Any sort of food scraps absolutely get collected and are hauled out. And in my opinion, the best way to deal with that is what I deal with waste every meal. Meaning I'm getting rid of excess packaging, which you should already know to do at home. Everything should be all broken down in Ziplocs and plasticized and wrapped and sealed and other things at home ahead of time. So excess garbage is not even being taken on the trip. Then as things are being opened, they become the receptacles for the trash. So I'm thinking about how I'm going to get rid of my excess pancake batter in its liquid form, hopefully by eating it. But should there be liquid waste, I'm going to have Ziplocs or something that liquid waste is going back into. And I'm bagging my trash at every meal. Do not let trash accumulate. And in fact, I put those trash bags, whatever method I'm using, back into the food containers, hard-sided containers that I'm providing you, such so that as a cooler gets emptied of its food at a campsite, that's now the trash compact bag. Or a box that's being used for food, that's where trash will then go, as long as it's properly bagged. So bring a lot of plastic bags for those purposes. Bag as you cook. Every meal, make sure all your garbage is put away. It goes without saying it should be put away at night so we don't attract critters, various influences. There are no bears in this corridor. There's plenty of mini bears. There's plenty of small critters that would invade a campsite. So make sure all your food's put away. They are incapable of defeating a cooler or a box. So you don't have to worry about special bear bag techniques or anything of that nature, or bear boxing. But that's how you deal with solid waste. Now, we go so far as to collect everything. That means that if I was cutting a tomato on a cutting board, I'm using an extreme example, and the seeds from the tomato drop into the sand, I'm going to reach down and squitch that little chunk of sand that has those tomato seeds, and they're going in the trash. When you're not banana peels, orange peels, apple cores, everything that was brought from an urban environment is hauled back out again. And it's fairly simple if you think about it. There aren't critters in the lower salmon that know how to digest or break down a banana peel. That's not part of that natural environment, nor is an apple core. That's not native to that corridor. So there are no micro or macro species that are going to attack that. So you brought it there. The rule is it's got to go back out again. Now let's talk about human waste. Fecal matter, number 2. All of that is hauled out as well. And I am providing a very efficient, easy way for you to deal with it. There will be a toilet system, which I'll go into, I think, during the group portion of this. But all fecal matter is hauled out. Furthermore, you don't have to deal with it after that, because you bring it home to me and I deal with it. And I'm providing a fresh toilet tank for every single campsite. So you open up the toilet tank at camp, you use it till the following morning, you seal it up, and you never deal with it the rest of the trip, and you bring it home to me, and lucky me, I get to deal with the poop. So all waste is hauled out. We must be meticulous in our campsites. We even will include a mesh tarp that goes under the kitchen area that allows sand to filter down through it, but captures food scraps. And at the end of your camping experience, you pull the tarp up, the sand stays behind. Hopefully you've gathered the food scraps. So there's tools to help you do this. We just want you to understand why these tools are in effect. Now, the 4th principle of leave no trace, and these may be out of order, but I don't think they are. Leave what you find. This corridor actually has some ancient history. You may find ancient First Nation or whatever peoples, different archaeological artifacts. The government considers anything older than about 50 years to become is archaeological. So even old mining things and tools from pioneers and cabins and other things like that you find, they derive their power by being there and causing you to have a unique experience. I'm going to give you a quick example. It doesn't have anything to do with rafting, but I was on a sea kayaking trip. Well, actually, it was a coastal sailing trip, technically, in Baja. On the beach, we came across a really unique skull. I had never seen this type of skull before. And someone figured out and determined it was the skull of a sea turtle. And it was wonderful to see this sea turtle skull, right? It derived its power and its influence on me by being there and being left there and not taken home by me and put on a shelf in my family room as a collector's item. So the point being, everything there should be left there. You should only be taking photographs and memories. Don't take anything. Pioneer stuff, archaeological stuff, anything you find, just leave it there. It's part of that natural environment for other people to enjoy. The 5th leave no trace principle is fire. Got to have fire, right? Well, believe it or not, unless there's a fire ban, which is highly unlikely, you're welcome to have fire. You just have to deal with it in a really specific way. I'll talk more details, but I'm going to provide an approved Forest Service fire pan, and that's how we deal with fire. That's also how we deal with charcoal briquettes. So I'll talk about that in the third segment for those of you planning Dutch oven style cooking, which you are welcome to do on this trip. There's a specific way you deal with the charcoal briquettes. So unless there's a fire ban, which is highly unlikely, you're welcome to have fire. You just have to have it raised off the ground in a fire pit. So you're going to have your nighttime devotional fire camp or campfire experience or program in a raised campfire, nothing touching the ground or touching the sand. The sixth principle of leave no trace is how we interact with wildlife. And there is, even though this is a desert environment, there is lots of wildlife to see. In fact, the greatest number of a fairly rare thing to see in the West, desert bighorn sheep. I saw a herd of over 40 of them, probably as close as that climbing wall to that side of that wall, because what was between us was a river. And they were right on one of our campsites and right on the other side of the river, and over 40 bighorn sheep came down this hillside in the evening to drink. And of course, they wouldn't have come down the side where we were camping, but no, with the river between us, they felt safe and comfortable. So there's lots of wildlife, and you can even, it's a great experience, but view them with respect from a distance. Don't leave food to habituate them to humans. Take care of your waste products, but enjoy the wildlife that are there. There is definitely wild. I've seen river otters. I've seen quite a number of wild critters on the Lower Salmon River trip. The seventh and final thing is how we interact with other humans. After all of these ethical principles are in place so that you have a really great wilderness experience. But how we impact with others impacts their wilderness experience. So a couple courtesy issues to be aware of. When you're putting on in the boat ramp where you launch and the boat ramp where you take out, be courteous of other people. Some people will show up with a trailered boat. They just need to run it down to the water, get going right away. They don't have any real rigging to do. Let them do that. Inflate the boats off to the side of the ramp. Rig the boats, which you will be doing, and you'll be taught how to do that off to the side. Just be respectful of others, particularly where you congregate at the put-in and the takeout. There's a rule as well to the campsites. All the camping is first come, first serve. You can't reserve any kind of campsite. And if people are living by the ethical principles, you are not allowed to occupy a campsite prior to 1:30 in the afternoon, and your entire group has to be there. You can't send one raft downriver, claim a particular campsite. And the commercial people are not allowed to do that either. And they tend to be a little bit better at obeying the rules because their livelihood is at stake if they were to get busted too many times by the patrolling rangers. So your entire group should travel as a group, be respectful of others, and then don't occupy a campsite until after 1:30 in the day. The other thing about that would be if it's a large group, occupy the larger campsites, and they're indicated on the guide. If you're a smaller group, small in my mind is 12, 15 people, large is 20, 24, and you can take as large a group as 30, which is unique compared to what we are limited to with 12 in the Cascades on a backpacking trip. Just be respectful of others. Be respectful of noise as well. I wouldn't be too rowdy and noisy after 10 at night, and I wouldn't be too rowdy or noisy before about 8 in the morning or so. So just be respectful of others, and everyone will have a great time. Now, should you find yourselves late in the day, it's getting dark, you are planning on a particular campsite, you pull around the bend, it's occupied, and then you happen to know by looking at the guide that there's a gorge ahead because there's 4 separate rock-walled gorges where you can't camp, and the next campsite's on the other side of that gorge and it's 4 or 5 miles away, and you pull around the bend and that campsite's occupied, it's certainly okay to pull over and respectfully explain and ask the person, can we share the campsite for the night? And hopefully they would let you. If they really put up a big whatever, hooey about it, then you really probably ought to go ahead and start pulling on some oars and some paddles really fast and traverse that 5 miles and go through that gorge and get to the other campsite. But it's certainly acceptable at least to pull over and ask them. Certainly if they are a group of 5 or 6 rafts and they only have one of their rafts there, and you quiz them and you find out that they're a large group but they don't have all their boats there, then they're not supposed to be there in the first place. Or at least they're not allowed to shoo you away. So that's the 7 principles of leave no trace as it pertains to Western River corridors.